every time I'm trying to like make sense of the world around myself, I can find myself, getting caught in the same semantic web that we all do. And the thing that pulls me out is to stop thinking of this class struggle that we're in right now as one that is between human beings that are arranged in a class position. It is between humans and capitalism as a distinct will. Now, of course, it's expressing that will through humans, and those humans are capitalists, but they do not seek what capitalism seeks, but they can't operate any other way because they have been technologically overdetermined. Their brains have been rewired as acutely as a fucking programmed assassin from the CIA in like the most outlandish version of MK Ultra would be. They're expressing a separate non-human capitalist will, a real God in the world. There's a guy named Ian Wright. Someone sent this to me today and I read it. There's a guy named Ian Wright last year wrote a blog post called Marx on Capital as a Real God. And I read that today and I was like, yes, precisely. We have to think of capitalism not as a thing that capitalists worship the way that Christians worship Jesus or whatever. The relationship of submission is similar. The difference is that Jesus is just their collective will, filtered through democratic and cultural institutions. Jesus is what they wanted to do collectively. However, that's determined by force and extraction and exploitation and hierarchy. It is determined. And however it's determined by those people is what God wants. Under capitalism, these people are worshiping a God that has its own will, independent of theirs. So even the people benefiting from capitalism are being immiserated spiritually. They're miserable. They have to consume more and more and distract themselves more and more from the basic position of alienation and guilt that they feel. They have to filter that through an anxious and neurotic culture that they generate to allow themselves to feel good about whipping their fellow humans instead of being whipped. Of course, the person being whipped is experiencing significant, horrifying alienation of the physical kind, but that also has a spiritual dimension. Everybody is being spiritually impoverished. No one is doing what they would like to do if they could get together and make a decision, but they're locked in this death embrace by their need to appease the God. Because everyone in every room is answering to debt, answering to money, answering to a ledger book that is transcendent of human will. You got the goddamn heads of Europe together in the Middle Ages, in the feudal era, to determine a question of religion. The answer was found by their collective will. If some group didn't like it, they could fight them, but whoever won and got to impose their will. But it was collectively decided. Modern capitalist ruling class, filtered down through the positions of everybody under it, are not ever in charge of any decision about what is to be done. Because all of the conflicts, all of the social ills, all of the baffling array of human cultures in conflict and in collaboration, striking off each other throughout history, the cascade of social realities, and then as time goes on, as you look through history, the overabundance of material to sift through, the amount of information we have about the past. It makes discerning a human narrative one that presumes that human minds are in control of this process, it makes it very difficult to arrange them in a way that feels consistent and coherent. And that is why we end up allowing capitalism to determine for us, because we can't convince ourselves. It's too much information. It's too varied. Why would X do Y? Y is not Z. But if you understand that once capitalism becomes a hegemonic cultural set of cultural practices, that you have created a non-human intelligence that is going to battle humanity over control of this thing called technology, that the civilization that emerges from humans' desire to survive, which is cooperative, which is instinctively cooperative until equilibrium is breached, in which it then, as a measure of emergency, hierarchy is introduced into the system, but then it persists because of its domination of technology until disequilibrium breaks it up again and another class structure emerges in power. That is a struggle that is over resources by humans. But once capitalism emerges as a way for humans to cooperatively pursue their ends as they understand them. Now, when I say cooperatively, it becomes coercive, but it is not just coercive. Every social order, every civilization has degrees of coercion and consent within the system, and they're managed around technology and the intensity of technology. But they are held by human hands. When capitalism emerges out of the Westphalian state competitive framework of Europe, a place with no resources, but also no threat from imperial domination from without, intensity of focus around technology leads to the ability to dominate others in a way that can drastically increase the efficiency of technological intensification. And everyone in the leading positions within the power structures of Europe pursued those goals. The thing that'll help you dominate. Why you have to pursue it. But intensifying technology means intensifying urban relationships. It means intensifying the creation of cultural structures, of things that gravitate around not the staid rural idiocy of land-based tenure, but around the dynamics, capital circulation engines of urban modernity. And so that means that the power dynamic between the old landed powers who unleash capitalism to compete against the other old landed powers, give power to their emerging bourgeois who then over time destroy them, either destroy them if they can't accommodate quickly enough, like the Stuarts and the Bourbons and the Romanovs, or are able to be bought off essentially into positions of ceremonial power, like the post-Glorious Revolution English monarchs or the Scandinavian monarchs. Either way, they surrender power to their bourgeois, to their national bourgeois, who then go to war against the other national bourgeois. And emerging from the dust of that is America overseeing a post-World War II reorganization of the world into for the first time, a global structure of capitalist extraction. And for me, like when I'm like all theory is, all Marxism is as a study, as a study, it really is just the study of history, because everything within it that you want to talk about, economics, the sociology, all the things that Marx did, the journalism, it's all just wrapped around history, as in it is a narrativizing of the past after it has happened. It is narrativizing it. It is not seeking, it's not pulling some sort of like mechanistic truth out, because you can't get that. What you can do is tell a story. And so, and everybody does this. Like every bourgeois historian does the same thing. We're all telling a story about the past. It's just, for the Marxist, the thing that distinguishes them from those others is that you understand that that's what you're doing. You understand. You take the leap of faith. You take the leap of Kierkegaardian faith that, yes, I am telling a story here. I am not divining a truth, but that in so doing, I'm going to be saying something that is still true. And the paralysis of the capitalist intellectual is that they can't make the leap. They have to get one more piece of information that is going to convince them that now that they can make the leap. And that leads them to just allowing the categories and narratives of capitalism that they've absorbed to overdetermine their response to it. And of course, all of that motivated by their unconscious and conscious class interests. The only thing that cuts through these is that leap of faith. And then once you have that, you say, okay, capitalism is God. You can look at the iron filings of history, like look back on them and then hold that fucking rod, that galvanized rod over them, and they will all start to line up. And this is, of course, the stuff that made Karl Popper so horrifically incensed by the very notion of Marxism as a science. Popper was like, not falsifiable. It's like, there is a thing called science that involves like practical application of mind. But that is not the same thing as the spirit that animates our pursuit of science. And that is made in theology and history. It is made in the humanities, broadly construed. It is the story we tell about the past that then we live by, having shaped us. And at every point of this process, you are accumulating this massive amount of exploitation and misery at the bottom, but then filtering up to the top, because at a certain point, even your fucking bourgeois are starting to become disaffected with capitalism as they lose power to capital unrestrained in the form of the algorithm that can be administrated technologically with no human intervention. And you can see the entire history, modern history, from the wars of religion and the 30 Years' War that create the Westphalian state, and that are the first big explosions of resistance to capitalism emerging from both the peasant class in the form of the Peasants' Wars of the 1520s to the revolt of the barons and the electors of the Holy Roman Empire, the 30 Years' War, and of course the lowland burghers of the Dutch, the Spanish Netherlands. And then the post-revolutionary French Revolutionary centuries of war in Europe is the emergent national bourgeois of these different states fighting one another for control of a world market that they can dominate technologically from their metropoles. So they're battling now with the resources of a planet, even though they are still just little old Europe. And that means they gain the capacity to destroy each other on a mass and unprecedented scale. And they do eventually. But capitalism is not destroyed as it should have been, because while they were doing that, The settler colony of America was absorbing all of the excess social conflict and alienation that their system couldn't contain, even with their wars and shit. There was still a lot of excess. And instead of it overthrowing from below capitalism, it vented off opposition to it, where it reformed in a place where the endless capacity for territorial expansion at the expense of less socially developed pre-capitalist subjects meant that capitalism could be reforged with a smoother mechanism for social interaction, a greater degree of consent from within the structures of capitalism in the form of free real estate. This is the bump. This is my drum I've been banging now. I feel like after reading Greg Grandin's End of the Myth is one of the most clarifying experiences I've had of the last 5 years in terms of clearing the cobwebs and trying to understand what is going on in this fucking country. And free real estate meant that the social angst of Europe that exploded over and over again in peasant revolts and wars of religion and then nationalist movements could be subsumed by giving people fucking land, giving them an idea that they could still be at the right end of the deal, not get the shit end of the stick of capitalism. That they could be the one holding the whip and not the one being whipped. The problem is that being there whipping on behalf of someone else is still alienating. And the social now the thing is that the deal we got as Americans is breaking down, and that's why our politics are breaking down, because we're no longer able to promise a better future, more consumption instead of more freedom over our lives, because that's gone. We're no longer going to get the good deal. The people who made a deal and held the whip because it benefited them in the near term are now in a position where they cannot guarantee collectively their best interest, and it's driving them crazy. It's driving us all crazy. We're in the Winchester Mystery House. We're locked in a cycle of guilt and exploitation and misery, where the people in charge are so detached from the real conditions of pain the system causes, because their lives are so goddamn comfortable. The most comfortable lives anyone's ever lived in human history. And what I mean that is that literally less pain, physical discomfort. Physical discomfort. I know that that's a relative thing, but it's also an absolute thing. There is degrees of pain that we feel less of. And this is more important. This is even more important. There are degrees of comfort and pleasure that we can pursue that we never could have before.